So I've experienced a lot of sports and varieties of athletics, and looking at all of that, I can understand a sense of how there's a lot of there's it depends on each sport kind of thing, So when I'm looking at expensive sport with lots of resources, we can see that there tends to be a trend of stereotyping in a sense. Versus in the less expensive where there's less resources and people who have struggles throughout families and whatnot, they tend to have less of a stereotyping. I mean, yes, when you see there's a black person, a white person, and Asian, that you can see the difference, but within the group, when I'm within football, I can feel that I'm part of a family. Versus when I played hockey throughout my life, I could tell that I was being stereotyped as an Asian. There's all these kind of stereotypes that we can see, such as Asians can't play sports, and they can only study, or African Americans are really good at sports because their genetics and everything. But honestly, how I see it is that I don't really see stereotypes, but there's just is stereotype in the world. Not just because it's sports, but it just happens throughout the world. So. I don't think
Or is it
has.
all just
I
like
think
economically based?
I think it's economically based. It just happens to be that resources applied. All these resources available to different people make a difference. So people who with the cheap sports, are tend to be people with less availability of resources, and that's not because they're of a certain race. It just means that the economic background is just that way for that certain family slash that certain sport. And so, it just happens to be that like some sports like tennis and hockey seem to be, in the expensive realm versus the cheaper ones are like football, basketball, and whatnot. So, and it does make the stereotype difference, but honestly, it just happens to be that way. And it's because of that trend. What's really interesting is I think that latest idea is broken because when we look at the professional level, I think there are people who grew up in such a poor background but end up going to the NFL, NHL, MLB, wherever they go, they end up somehow breaking that trend because now they're the elitists. They're the ones who are making money because they're so good at what they're doing. So I think there isn't such a thing as elitist based off of stereotypes and race, but I think that people have broken that just because they're so athletic enough to break that trend. Definitely I've seen a lot throughout my life going through these sports, and I can see the stereotypes definitely, but at the same time I think it has to do a lot with the environment. So coming here to Notre Dame, well, first when I played football, to be honest, I was thinking, well, I don't know how I can handle the situation because I'm from such a different culture. But coming in to Notre Dame and having experienced high school football, I was able to take advantage of that and be able to just adapt to the situation and be able to create a family of my own. So I don't think it has to do with what exactly the sport is, but I think it has to do with the team you want to be on. If the team isn't as accepting, well, you gotta somehow grow accustomed to it. So.
Like being African American, being a sprinter is like most of the you kind of hear like, oh, all the white people do distance and all the black people do sprints and like jumps, and that's just kind of like a big stereotype in track is that like you don't really see too many black people doing distance unless they're African, like Kenyans and like South Africans or whatever. But most of the African Americans do distance and sprinters because they're faster than white people and white people, you know what I mean? So me personally, I'm a sprinter. So like my body type is not necessarily a sprinter body type. So through my entire life, like even here, like in high school, I'd show up at meets and like I'd be like in checking for like the 55-meter dash or like the 100-meter dash, 200, 400, and people would just, I mean, you can obviously tell people stereotype you and they're just like, oh, he's not fast because he's like skinny and black, so he's probably a miler. Like I've had people come up to me at like nationals. We were at nationals, and people were like, "Oh, what do you do? Like 800? Like do you do the mile?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I run the 4." And they're like, "Really? Like wow." So it's just kind of been like followed me throughout my entire track career. It's just me being black and like skinny, and they don't associate that with like fast and sprint, like a big black dude. I mean, you definitely see a lot of, as far as like cheap sports versus like expensive sports, you definitely see a lot of like poor African Americans doing track because like all you need are spikes and like a pair of running shoes, and ultimately just wear some shorts and a t-shirt. Like there's other things that you can buy, but like running is running, everyone can do it. So like if you just have some shoes, you know you see a lot of like poorer families doing track because it's easy and it's a good sport for their children to do if they can't afford it. As far as like being an athlete at Notre Dame, people automatically assume that you, like, if you're black, they automatically assume that you're an athlete here. So, like, I've met people and they're like, "Oh, what sport do you play?" Like, before they even ask me, like, "Are you a regular student here?" Or they'll say, like I've had actual people, like, confuse me for, like, basketball players or, like, football players. Like older people too. Like I'll walk into my locker room going to practice and like clearly have like track and field gear on, like sweats, tights, and I've had like an older, like one of the officials in Jack come up to me and be like, "Oh, did you need help getting into the locker room? I think they changed the code today." And I'm like, no, my locker room's right here. And he's like, "Oh, I thought you were on a basketball team." And then I've had people come up to me like, "Good game, Demetrius." Like, but I'm not Demetrius Jackson. So, like, I don't know. That's not necessarily have anything to do with track, but, like, I guess it's just, like, stereotypes in sports. I guess more specifically on track, I actually they printed out in, I don't know if you guys read The Observer, but last week, I think it was last week, they had, The Observer did a nice, like, spread on the track meet, the first track meet, which was 2 weeks ago, and I won the 400. And they had like a nice spread, like, so I opened up The Observer. Well, I didn't read The Observer, but like I got text, and in The Observer you see the caption is Eric Ways wins the 400 meter at Blue and Gold Invitational. Great job, Notre Dame. And the picture is one of our teammates who graduated 2 years ago.
It's not even you.
It's not even me, yeah. And I mean they've done it before to like white athletes too, but like clearly they didn't care about the picture because like they're an establishment. Like they have, I don't know if they have their photos saved or like if they just like, it's so easy. Like they have my name. They could have just gone to Google and Notre Dame, Eric Waits Notre Dame, and you can see my picture as soon as it pops up. But like obviously the guy or whoever wrote the article didn't care for it to do that. This is also like kind of nitpicky, but like in the picture you see, oh yeah, it was the guy. He has a baton in his hand, and like the 400 isn't even a relay; it's an open event. So like that's another clue that obviously this guy's not Eric Ways. So I don't know. That's just kind of things that like you have to deal with. Oh, I mean, it pisses me off. Like, I don't really get mad. I'm not angry. Like, oh, I could be like. So I actually lie sometimes, and I'm like, people are like, "Oh, do you play sport?" And I go, "No, I'm a regular student," and like, kind of a little sassy, but like, it's just kind of angry. Like, that's the first thing you think of when you see someone. Like in the Observer article, made me so angry. I emailed the editor, and I like was like, "This isn't me," and I still haven't got a response back. Yeah, but like when people say like, "Oh, you play sport here," like automatic, like older people on planes, like when we travel, when I'm like traveling, walking around like an airport with Notre Dame gear on, they're like, "Oh, are you on the basketball team? Like, are you on the football team?" Like, and it's like just like I understand they love, they're not doing it maliciously, but it's just like a microaggressive thing that like is clearly a problem, and like you just automatically assuming someone